The Nile, in the early hours, is not a river, it is a mirror of the sky. In those quiet moments before the sun rises, the waters run dark, heavy with the weight of dreams, yet laced with streaks of silver from the fading moon. Birds stir in the papyrus reeds, their calls breaking the silence like distant chimes. Somewhere, the hum of a city awakening begins, the rustle of baskets, the crack of pottery lids, the hiss of fires being coaxed into life. This is Meroë, heart of the kingdom of Kush, in the 1st century before the Common Era. Here, the air is warm with desert breath, and the sand carries the memory of countless footsteps. Beyond the city walls, the royal palace rises in golden sandstone, painted with ochres and blues, its high doors guarded by men whose spears catch the light of the first sun. And within those walls walks a queen, one whose name will echo far beyond the southern reaches of the Nile, Amanirenas, Candace of Kush. She is not a queen who wears her crown for ceremony alone. Her hands know the feel of bowstrings, her eyes, the measure of battlefields. Tall and broad-shouldered, with skin like polished bronze and eyes that never look away from an adversary, Amanirenas carries herself as if carved from the same stone as the temples that honor her. In the language of her people, Candace is more than a title. It is the weight of leadership, the mother of the kingdom, the defender of its breath and blood. Her reign begins in an age of unease. To the north, the Roman Empire stretches its fingers further down the Nile. They have taken Egypt, they have claimed its riches, and now their eyes turn toward Nubia. The deserts and the cataracts are no obstacle to their ambition. But Amanirenas knows the land, the rivers, and the will of her people, and she knows that to bow is to vanish. One morning, as the sun climbs high, the news comes, Roman troops have crossed into Nubian lands. They march in shining armor, carrying standards crowned with eagles, their shields flashing like molten gold. The markets whisper, the temples grow tense. But in the palace courtyard, Amanirenas does not wait for fear to take root. She orders the warriors to gather, the horses to be saddled, and the drums to call out across the plains. Her voice is calm, even gentle, but it carries the finality of stone, they will not take what is ours. The battles that follow will not be sung of in Rome with the same reverence as their victories, but here, in the heart of Kush, they will be remembered as the days the desert rose. Amanirenas leads her armies herself, riding under the blazing sun, her bow drawn, her commands swift. The sand becomes the theater of a war where speed and terrain matter more than sheer numbers. She strikes and vanishes, cuts supply lines, and leaves the Romans grasping at empty air. Yet the war is not without cost. In one battle, Amanirenas loses an eye to a Roman blade. When she returns to Meroë, the people see her wound, the empty space where the eye once was, and instead of sorrow, they feel pride. She does not hide it. She wears the scar as another crown, a mark of unbroken will. Years pass in this grinding contest between empire and kingdom. There are moments of quiet, where treaties are discussed, promises spoken, but always, the Nile carries the murmur of danger. It is in these years that Amanirenas proves that a queen is not only a warrior but also a diplomat. When the final peace is reached, it is she who ensures that Kush remains free, that no tribute will be paid to Rome, and that her people will stand as they always have, beneath their own sun. The city celebrates her return from the last negotiations. Gold dust is thrown into the air, dancers move in the streets, and the great drums of Kush echo deep into the night. But Amanirenas, in the quiet of her palace, walks to the balcony overlooking the Nile. The river runs black under the stars, carrying whispers to lands she has never seen. She knows her name will travel with them, carried in stories told by traders, in the carvings on temple walls, and in the memory of her people. In the centuries to come, other queens will rise, some to peace, others to war. But the first step in our journey through the forgotten thrones of Africa begins here, in the golden light of Kush, with the steady gaze of the one-eyed queen who would not bend to an empire. And as the night closes over Meroë, the story drifts onward, carried northward on the Nile, toward the shadowed tombs and silent columns of another queen, the pharaoh who wore the crown of both worlds. The Nile does not hurry. It glides northward as it has for millennia, carrying the breath of the southern kingdoms to the far lands where the river becomes the sea. From the gold-lit plains of Kush, our journey drifts into the lands of towering stone and eternal gods, Kemet, which the world will call Egypt. The air here is heavy with the perfume of lotus blossoms and the ever-present whisper of the wind moving across temple walls. It is here, some 15 centuries before Amanirenas, that another queen would rise, though she would not call herself queen. Her name was Hatshepsut, and she would claim the title no woman before her had worn so fully, Pharaoh. The sun is just cresting over the Theban hills when we first see her palace. Its courtyards are flooded with light, columns painted in reds and blues, shadows falling in the sharp, ordered shapes that only Egypt's architects could carve from sunlight. Beyond them stands the queen, robed in white linen, a collar of gold and turquoise spread across her shoulders, the crook and flail, symbols of divine kingship, resting in her hands. Upon her head is not a diadem of a consort, but the striped Nemes headdress of a pharaoh, its golden cobra poised between her brows. Hatshepsut was not meant to rule in her own right. Born the daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I, she was wed to her half-brother, Thutmose II, as custom dictated. When he died young, she became regent for his son, still a child, too young to carry the weight of Egypt's double crown. But regency is a delicate role, a place between power and obedience. Hatshepsut did not linger there for long. In the second year of her regency, she took the throne outright, not as queen, but as Pharaoh, the chosen of the gods. The scribes carved her name into stone alongside those of the kings before her, adding the title Motker, truth is the soul of Ra. She would rule not as a caretaker but as Egypt's living god, the earthly vessel of divine order. Her reign was not marked by endless war, but by prosperity. Under her hand, Egypt's temples flourished, trade routes opened to the distant land of Punt, bringing incense trees, ivory, and gold. One can imagine her standing at the decks of the great ships as they set sail from the Red Sea, the wind filling their sails, her mind fixed not on conquest, but on the weaving of connections across seas and sands. Perhaps her greatest legacy is carved into the cliffs at Deir el-Bahari, her mortuary temple, Djeser Jezru, the Holy of Holies. Terraces rise in perfect harmony with the limestone cliffs, colonnades like open arms to the sun. Priests still walk its shaded halls, the scent of burning myrrh drifting between pillars, while reliefs on the walls tell the story of her divine birth, her coronation, and the voyages to Punt. In each scene, Hatshepsut appears not in the slender form of a queen, but with the broad shoulders and ceremonial beard of a pharaoh. It was not disguise, it was a declaration, she was Egypt's ruler in every way. But power draws shadows. In the years after her death, her name was chiseled from monuments, her statues smashed, her face erased from the walls. Some say her stepson, Thutmose III, ordered it to strengthen his own legacy, others believe it was to prevent other women from claiming the throne. For centuries, her story lay buried in dust and silence. And yet, the stones remember. In the quiet of dawn, when the desert turns gold, her temple still stands, its lines perfect, its walls whispering her name. Hatshepsut, the woman who wore the crown of both Upper and Lower Egypt, who ruled for more than 2 decades, who proved that the power of Pharaoh was not bound to a man's hand. The Nile moves on, as it always does, carrying us forward in time and space. Its waters ripple past the lush riverbanks, the quiet fishing boats, the silent watchers carved in stone. Far to the southeast, beyond the Red Sea and across the incense-rich winds, lies a kingdom that Egypt once knew well, the fabled land of Punt. And there, another queen waits in the half-forgotten dawn. The sails are white against a sky of deep blue, their cloth swollen with a wind that smells of salt and resin. Beneath them, the Red Sea lies restless, its waves chasing one another in long rolling swells. The journey from Egypt has been slow and careful, for the waters here are as changeable as the moods of kings. But as the days pass, the horizon grows hazy with the outline of hills, and the air becomes thick with the perfume of myrrh. This is the land of Punt, a place the ancient Egyptians called God's land, rich in incense trees, gold dust, and ivory. Here, the shoreline is a braid of sandy beaches and rocky outcrops, dotted with palm groves that sway in the ocean breeze. The air hums with the songs of unseen birds, and somewhere inland, the beating of drums welcomes the ships from across the sea. Upon a low hill above the harbor, the people of Punt gather. They are dressed in bright cloths dyed in ochres and reds, shells and beads woven into their hair. At their head stands a woman whose presence is like the crest of a wave, tall, straight-backed, and crowned with a headdress of woven gold threads. This is Queen Adi, known to her people as the Beloved, a ruler whose reign was marked not only by trade and plenty, but by the quiet strength of protection. We know her from the walls of Hatshepsut's temple, where she is carved alongside her husband, welcoming the Egyptian fleet. But the carvings cannot show the way her eyes might have softened as she greeted her guests, nor the way her hands bore the calluses of someone who had once drawn a bow in defense of her land. For Punt was not always a land of peace. Its position along the coast made it a prize for raiders and rival chieftains. In her youth, Adi had ridden at the head of her warriors, fighting off incursions from the hinterlands, her hair braided close to her head to fit beneath a leather helm. Her skill with a spear was as well known as her skill in council, and by the time she took the throne, Punt was united under a single banner for the first time in generations. When the Egyptians arrived with gifts of beads, gold, and fine linen, Adi welcomed them not as supplicants, but as equals. Trade was not tribute, it was a pact between powers. Her people loaded the Egyptian ships with incense trees rooted in baskets of earth, so they might grow again along the Nile's banks, carrying the scent of Punt into the temples of Ammonius. In the evenings, when the feasting fires were lit along the harbor, Adi would walk among her people. Children would cling to her robes, merchants would bring her samples of their wares, and elders would greet her with blessings that traced back to the ancestors. It was said that when she smiled, the drums in the distance seemed to quicken, and when she spoke, the noise of the waves quieted, as though the sea itself listened. Her reign wove Punt into the web of African kingdoms, binding it through trade and kinship rather than conquest. But beyond the bustle of markets and the hum of ships, Adi remained a guardian. The coastal watchtowers were never unmanned, the warriors' spears always sharpened. For she knew that peace was not a gift, it was something to be kept, carefully, like a flame shielded from the wind. When the Egyptians returned home, their ships heavy with treasures, they carved her likeness on the temple walls at Deir el-Bahari, forever tying her name to theirs in the stone's patient memory. Centuries later, long after her people's harbors had fallen silent, travelers would speak of a queen who ruled beside the sea, whose wisdom was as deep as the waters, and whose generosity was matched only by her readiness to defend what was hers. And so our journey turns westward again, carried back along the Red Sea's restless path, past the deserts and the cataracts of the Nile, into the green heart of Africa, to the court of a woman whose influence reached even the great pharaohs of Egypt. The river slows, and in its stillness, the voice of history introduces us to Queen Tiye, the mother of pharaohs. The sun over the Nile is a gold so deep it seems to seep into the very stones of the temples. Along the western bank at Thebes, gardens of papyrus and lotus line the palace grounds, their leaves trembling under the weight of the warm wind. Here, in a court filled with the scent of perfumed oils and the murmur of foreign tongues, we meet Queen Tiye, a woman whose voice could shape the affairs of empires. She was not born to royal blood. Her parents, Yaa and Thuya, were of noble but non-royal lineage, her father, a respected commander of chariotry, her mother, a woman of influence at court. From her youth, Tiye was educated in diplomacy, religion, and the delicate balance of power. Her mind was as sharp as the gilded knives given to foreign dignitaries, and her beauty, often described in the language of the poets, was only the doorway to a far greater presence. When she married Amenhotep III, one of Egypt's most powerful pharaohs, Tiye did not simply take her place as consort. She became his partner in governance. Foreign envoys wrote her name in their records, not as a shadow behind the king, but as a ruler in her own right, one whose counsel could not be ignored. In letters preserved in the dusty clay of the Amarna archives, kings from Babylon, Mitanni, and beyond addressed her directly, bypassing her husband when they sought Egypt's ear. Tiye's influence reached beyond politics. She was a patron of the arts, overseeing the adornment of temples and the expansion of ceremonial sites. At the palace of Makeda, her gardens bloomed with exotic plants brought from distant lands, and her reception halls were filled with golden-laid furniture, alabaster vessels, and the deep, resonant music of foreign harps. But power, as always, was shadowed by trials. As the years passed, Amenhotep III's health waned. When he died, their son, Amenhotep IV, later known as Akhenaten, took the throne. Tiye remained at the heart of the court, her wisdom guiding the transition into her son's unprecedented reign. When Akhenaten moved the capital to Akhetaten and began his radical devotion to the Aten, the sun disk, Tiye followed him. Yet she also maintained ties to the traditional priesthood and old nobility, a delicate balancing act that kept Egypt from splintering in those turbulent years. It is said that in her later life, foreign kings still wrote to her, addressing her as great royal wife and mistress of the two lands. Her word could soothe feuds, seal alliances, and steady the uncertain course of her son's reforms. Even as the political sands shifted, she remained unshaken, a living pillar in a court that had seen gods replaced and traditions rewritten. When Tiye died, she was laid to rest with honors befitting a pharaoh's equal. Her name was carved alongside kings, her memory carried in the songs of the court musicians, and her image, serene and commanding, cast in stone for temples across the Nile. In the hush of evening, when the last light strikes the cliffs of Thebes, it is said her presence can still be felt, a figure in a long linen gown, walking slowly through the gardens she once tended, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun sinks into the western desert. Our boat pushes off once more, the oars dipping into the river's dark surface. The stars are beginning to appear overhead, each one a spark from the hearth of eternity. Ahead, the Nile narrows, winding toward a time when queens would wear a different name, Candace, and rule from a kingdom whose throne sat in the heart of Meroë. The night hums with the promise of the Candace queens. The Nile changes as it flows deeper into the south. Its waters quicken, breaking into cataracts where stone and current wrestle, and the banks rise into rugged hills streaked with iron-red earth. Beyond the last roar of the rapids, the river widens again, embracing the fertile lands of Nubia. Here stands the ancient city of Meroë, capital of the kingdom of Kush. It is a city of iron forges and sandstone temples, of markets filled with gold dust and cattle, of streets ringing with the voices of merchants from far-flung places. In its heart rises the palace, its walls painted with scenes of kings and queens, its gates guarded by warriors in leather armor, their spears tipped with bronze. But in Meroë, it is not only kings who wear the crown. Here, the title Candace, Queen Mother, is a throne in itself, the seat of absolute authority. For centuries, the Candace queens ruled Kush, sometimes alongside kings, sometimes in their stead, and often in defiance of foreign powers. Their reigns were not an exception to the rule, they were the rule. One of the earliest remembered is Amanishakheto, whose treasures would one day astonish the archaeologists who unearthed them. Her reign at the turn of the 1st century is marked by the building of grand temples and the commissioning of fine jewelry, gold bracelets etched with scenes of gods, emerald-inlaid pendants shaped like the wings of Isis. She appears in carvings as a figure of strength, her arm raised in blessing, her other hand gripping a spear. Another was Amanitor, a queen whose name appears beside that of a co-ruler, perhaps her husband or son. Together, they repaired the great temple of Ammonius at Naka, raised new pyramids in the royal cemeteries, and restored the reservoirs that watered the fields. Her image on temple walls shows her grasping captured enemies, a symbol of victory and order. But the most famous of the Candace queens, the one whose story traveled as far as Rome itself, was Amanirenas, the very same one-eyed warrior we met when our journey began. Her defiance of Rome ensured that Kush would remain free, her name etched into both Nubian memory and Roman records. In Meroë, the Candaces were more than rulers, they were symbols of the divine. The queens were linked to the goddess Isis and to the lion-headed warrior deity Apidmak, protectress and bringer of victory. Their authority came not only from bloodline but from the belief that they stood as living embodiments of the kingdom's gods. Travelers who came to Meroë spoke of the power in the queen's court, how foreign envoys would bow before them, how laws were issued in their name, how their voices decided the fate of wars and the flow of trade. They were custodians of the temples, guardians of the kingdom's wealth, and commanders of its armies. The royal cemeteries of Meroë still hold their pyramids, smaller and steeper than those of Egypt, but no less dignified. Each one rises from the desert like a stone flame, its entrance marked by carvings that tell of victories, offerings, and the passage into the next world. In the silence of the Nubian night, the wind sings around these monuments, as if carrying the voices of queens long gone. The Candace queens ruled for centuries, their power woven into the very fabric of Kushite life. And though time would eventually dim their names, the stones of Meroë remember. They remember the women who sat in judgment, who led in war, who built in peace, and who bore the title Candace as both a crown and a sword. From here, our journey turns eastward once again, toward the highlands where incense winds meet the mountain air, and where the Queen of Sheba begins her fabled path toward wisdom. The road to Sheba winds through highlands where the air is thin and bright, and the wind smells of frankincense carried from the valleys below. The sun here is sharper, the shadows cleaner, and the mountains rise like the spines of sleeping giants. In these lands, the crossroads of Africa and Arabia, history and legend are woven so tightly that their threads cannot be pulled apart. It is in this place, many centuries before the Common Era, that we find Makeda, the Queen of Sheba. Her story drifts between the scriptures, the histories of ancient kingdoms, and the songs of the Ethiopian highlands, each version colored by the voice that tells it. But in every telling, she is a figure of majesty, a ruler whose intellect and wealth matched the grandeur of her court. Makeda's kingdom straddled the Red Sea trade routes. From her ports came caravans heavy with gold, ivory, and the fragrant resins of frankincense and myrrh, bound for markets in Egypt, Arabia, and beyond. Her capital was a place of carved stone palaces, shaded courtyards, and gardens watered by clever channels that brought life to the dry hillsides. Her throne room, open to the mountain breezes, was said to be adorned with inlaid ivory and bronze, with guards dressed in robes dyed the deep blue of the indigo plant. But Makeda's fame was not built on riches alone. She was known for her wisdom, the kind that drew the attention of kings. And so the most famous chapter of her life begins, her journey to the court of King Solomon in Jerusalem. The scriptures tell of her traveling with a caravan unlike any the desert had seen, camels laden with spices, gold, and precious stones, accompanied by servants, musicians, and advisors. For weeks, they crossed sands that shimmered under the relentless sun, resting at oases where palms bent low over cool pools. When at last she reached Jerusalem, she came not as a supplicant, but as an equal, bringing riddles to test the king's wisdom. Their meeting is described as a union of minds, Solomon answering her questions with insight, Makeda matching him in wit and knowledge. In some versions, they exchanged gifts, in others, they shared more than conversation, and their descendants would go on to found dynasties in Ethiopia. Whatever the truth, the exchange between Sheba and Israel became a story of diplomacy wrapped in the language of legend. When Makeda returned to her kingdom, she carried more than treasures. She brought new ideas, alliances, and perhaps a deeper understanding of how her rule fit into the vast web of kingdoms and empires that stretched across the known world. Her reign, remembered in Ethiopia's Kebra Nagast, became the seed of a lineage that claimed descent from both her and Solomon, a line that would rule for centuries. In the markets of Sheba, traders still spoke of the queen who crossed deserts to seek wisdom, whose court was a place where poets and merchants, warriors and priests all found an ear. The hills still whispered her name when the incense harvest was brought down in woven baskets, their scent rising to meet the high mountain winds. And so Makeda's journey, both real and legendary, became more than a tale, it became a bridge between lands and peoples. From the red sands of Arabia to the green highlands of Ethiopia, from the scrolls of ancient scribes to the voices of storytellers by the fire, her story has traveled farther than any caravan could walk. As the incense smoke fades into the dusk, our path turns south, down the spine of Africa, toward the rolling hills where another queen shaped the destiny of a people through the son she raised, Queen Nandi, the mother of Shaka Zulu. The air in the southern grasslands is alive with movement. Tall stalks sway in the wind like the rippling surface of a golden sea, and the cries of distant birds carry across the horizon. Here, the land rolls gently beneath a wide, unbroken sky, dotted with thorn trees whose branches twist against the blue. In this world of open spaces and fierce beauty, we meet Queen Nandi, the mother of one of history's most formidable leaders, Shaka Zulu. But before her son's name would resound across the plains, Nandi's own strength would shape the path of the Zulu people. Nandi was born into the Langeni clan in the late 18th century, a time when alliances and rivalries between neighboring peoples shifted like grass in the wind. She was proud, intelligent, and fiercely independent, traits that would serve her well in the trials to come. Her life took a decisive turn when she became the mother of Shaka, the son of Zulu chieftain Nzinga. In the rigid customs of the time, Nandi's position was precarious. Her relationship with the chieftain was not bound by formal marriage, and when politics and jealousy flared, she found herself cast out from the Zulu court. With her young son, she sought refuge among the Mthethwa people, where her resilience would be tested again and again. Life in exile was not easy. The grasslands could be as harsh as they were beautiful, drought could wither the crops, predators stalked the herds, and raids from rival clans were an ever-present danger. Yet Nandi never allowed hardship to break her spirit. She protected Shaka fiercely, teaching him the values of discipline, courage, and self-respect. In the evenings, she would tell him the histories of their people, stories of warriors and leaders, planting in him the seeds of ambition. As Shaka grew, his skill as a warrior became evident. His tall frame, sharp mind, and relentless will began to attract the attention of leaders, including Dingiswayo of the Mthethwa, who saw in the young man a force that could unify the Zulu. Through it all, Nandi remained his anchor, offering counsel, tempering his impulses, and reminding him of the responsibilities that came with power. When Shaka rose to leadership after the death of his father and Dingiswayo, he transformed the Zulu into a disciplined, formidable kingdom. And through the years of his conquests and reforms, Nandi was more than just his mother, she was his advisor and confidant. Her influence was such that even the most hardened warriors treated her words with respect, for they knew her voice carried weight in the king's ear. In 1827, when Nandi passed away, Shaka ordered a period of mourning unlike any the kingdom had seen. Cattle were not slaughtered for food, crops were left unharvested, and music and dance fell silent. It was said the entire Zulu nation bowed its head for the woman who had given them their king. Today, Nandi's legacy is inseparable from that of Shaka, but it is also her own. She is remembered not only as the mother of a great leader but as a leader in her own right, a woman whose will and wisdom shaped the destiny of a people long before history would record their names. And as the winds move over the grasslands, whispering through the tall stalks, it is easy to imagine her still watching over the plains, her eyes sharp, her spirit unbroken. The land shifts again beneath our feet. The grasslands give way to forests and rivers, to the humid air of Central Africa, where another queen waits, a warrior and diplomat whose name still rings in the history of Angola, Queen Nzinga of Ndongo and Matamba. The land is thick with green here. The air hums with the chorus of insects, and the heavy scent of damp earth rises from the forest floor. Broad rivers wind like silver snakes through the jungle, their waters carrying traders, warriors, and messengers between distant settlements. It is here, in the early 17th century, that Queen Nzinga band would carve her name into the history of Angola. Born into the royal family of the Ndongo kingdom, Nzinga's early life was marked by political tension. The Portuguese had established a growing presence along the Atlantic coast, eager for territory, resources, and, most devastatingly, control of the slave trade. Her father, King Kaluanji, fought to resist their encroachment, and Nzinga absorbed from him both statecraft and the understanding that survival would require more than just swords. When her brother assumed the throne, the Portuguese pressed harder, demanding tribute and territory. Nzinga was sent as a diplomat to negotiate with them in Luanda. It was in this meeting that she displayed a symbolic act of defiance that would echo through history. When the Portuguese governor failed to provide her a chair, forcing her to sit lower than him, Nzinga ordered one of her attendants to kneel, becoming her human seat so she could meet his gaze as an equal. The message was clear: she would bow to no one. Her skills as a negotiator secured a temporary peace, but when her brother's rule faltered and Ndongo came under greater threat, Nzinga seized the throne. Now queen, she transformed herself into both a warrior and a strategist, forming alliances with neighboring peoples and even with former Portuguese enemies. She adopted guerrilla tactics, striking quickly at Portuguese forces before vanishing into the forests, using the terrain to her advantage. Nzinga was as adaptable in politics as she was in battle. When alliances shifted, she shifted with them. At one point converting to Christianity and taking the name Ana de Souza to strengthen diplomatic ties. But whether dressed in ceremonial robes or armored for war, her sharp mind and unyielding resolve were constant. For nearly 4 decades, Nzinga resisted Portuguese domination, ensuring that her people would not be easily subdued. Her rule over the twin kingdoms of Ndongo and Matamba turned them into a regional power, a sanctuary for escaped slaves, and a rallying point for African resistance. Even in her final years, she was still meeting with envoys, planning defenses, and securing her legacy. When she died in 1663, her people mourned not just a queen, but a symbol, proof that African sovereignty could endure in the face of empire. Today, in Angola, her name is spoken with pride. Statues of her on horseback stand tall, not merely as monuments of the past but as reminders of defiance, leadership, and the courage to meet the eyes of an empire without flinching. The sun burns golden over the rolling hills of Asante land. Drums throb in the distance, echoing off the clay walls of the villages, carrying messages between towns faster than any rider could travel. Here, in the kingdom of the Ashanti, in what is now Ghana, gold is not just a treasure but the lifeblood of the people. And at the heart of the kingdom's spirit lies the golden stool, a sacred throne believed to hold the soul of the Ashanti nation. In 1900, the winds of colonial ambition blew strong. The British had already claimed vast parts of West Africa, but the Ashanti resisted, determined to preserve their sovereignty. When the British governor, Sir Frederick Hodgson, demanded to sit on the golden stool as a symbol of his authority, the insult cut deep. The Ashanti chiefs debated how to respond, many hesitated, afraid of the overwhelming firepower of the British forces. It was then that Yaa Asantewaa, the Queen Mother of Ajisu, rose to speak. She was a woman in her late 50s, wrapped in cloth patterned with gold and black, her eyes blazing with a mixture of pride and indignation. "If you, the men of Ashanti, will not go forward," she declared, "then we, the women, will. I shall call upon my fellow women, and we will fight till the last of us falls in the battlefield." Her words stirred the chiefs from hesitation into action. Yaa Asantewaa took command of the Ashanti forces, an extraordinary act in a time and place where women rarely led armies. Under her leadership, the War of the Golden Stool began, a siege against the British fort at Kumasi. For months, her warriors surrounded the fort, cutting off supplies and repelling assaults. Though the British eventually broke the siege with reinforcements, the Golden Stool was never captured. Yaa Asantewaa was eventually taken prisoner and exiled to the Seychelles, where she died in 1921. Yet even in defeat, her courage became legend. She had stood at the front when others shrank back, defending not only a physical object but the spiritual heart of her people. The Golden Stool remained hidden, safe from foreign hands, and to this day it is never sat upon. It is placed above all earthly rulers, as a reminder that the soul of the Ashanti belongs only to its people. When you walk through Ghana now, you may see murals of Yaa Asantewaa, her hand raised high, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Her defiance still speaks, that dignity and spirit are worth defending, even against the might of empire. Beyond the gold-rich lands of Ghana, our journey turns eastward, where the Nile flows and the desert keeps its ancient secrets, toward the kingdom of Kush and the Candake queens who defied Rome. The Nile flows slow and heavy under the blazing Sudanese sun, its waters carrying the lifeblood of a kingdom older than memory. This is Kush, a land of red earth and golden dunes, of stone pyramids rising against the horizon, and of rulers whose crowns gleamed under the desert sky. Here, the title Candake, often rendered as Candace in ancient Greek texts, meant queen or queen mother, and it was no ceremonial position. The Candaces ruled in their own right, commanding armies, negotiating treaties, and guarding the borders of their realm. They were the beating heart and sharp sword of Kushite power. Among them, one name echoes loudest through history, Amanirenas. In 25 BCE, the Roman Empire, fresh from its conquest of Egypt, turned its gaze southward toward Kush. Rome, with its legions and war machines, expected swift submission. But Amanirenas had other plans. She was a queen of presence and authority, often depicted wearing a tall, feathered crown, her eyes steady and unyielding. When Roman troops invaded, she did not hide behind palace walls, she rode at the front of her warriors, a spear in hand. Her armies swept north, striking at Roman garrisons, burning forts, and capturing territory all the way into Egypt. The Roman governor of Egypt, Gaius Petronius, retaliated, pushing deep into Kush and capturing the city of Makeda. But Amanirenas did not falter. She regrouped her forces, waging a relentless campaign that wore down even the disciplined Roman legions. For years, the two powers clashed in the desert heat, neither able to claim final victory. Eventually, a peace treaty was struck, one so favorable to Kush that Roman historians remarked upon it with surprise. Rome withdrew from large stretches of territory, and the Kushites paid no tribute. It was a rare case where the empire did not expand but instead respected the sovereignty of those it sought to conquer. In the relief carvings that remain, the Candaces are shown towering over captured enemies, symbols of victory carved into sandstone walls. Their legacy is one of defiance, of proving that even the mightiest empire can be checked by the will of a determined people. As the sands shift and the centuries pass, the pyramids of Meroë still stand under the moonlight, their sharp edges cutting the night sky, silent witnesses to the reign of queens who would not bow. From the desert of Kush, our story will now cross the continent, into the lush hills and fertile valleys of Ethiopia, where another queen would weave faith, diplomacy, and legend into her rule. The air in the Ethiopian highlands is thin and cool, scented with frankincense and myrrh. The land rolls with green hills and golden plains, broken by the jagged silhouettes of mountains. In this timeless setting, the story of Queen Makeda begins, a tale that straddles the border between history and legend, carried by both scripture and song. Makeda is known to the world through the pages of the Bible, the Quran, and the Ethiopian epic Kebra Nagast. She is the queen of Sheba, a ruler of wealth and wisdom whose fame traveled far beyond her kingdom. According to tradition, her realm stretched across the Red Sea, encompassing parts of both Ethiopia and Yemen, controlling the rich trade routes of incense, gold, and precious stones. But it was not merely her riches that made her legendary, it was her curiosity. From distant lands came whispers of a king in Jerusalem whose wisdom was unmatched, Solomon. His court was said to be filled with poets, priests, and scholars, and his God a source of profound mystery. Makeda, intrigued by these tales, resolved to see for herself if this king was truly as wise as they claimed. The journey from Sheba to Jerusalem was no small undertaking. Her caravan was a moving city, camels laden with spices, ivory, and gold, guards in flowing robes with spears gleaming in the sun, attendants carrying silken tents for the queen's comfort. Across deserts and mountains, through heat and dust, the queen pressed onward, her mind alight with anticipation. When Makeda finally arrived, she found Solomon's court a marvel indeed. Columns of cedar framed halls rich with embroidered tapestries. Musicians played harps and lyres while scribes dipped their quills into ink, ready to record the wisdom exchanged between ruler and guest. The two are said to have spent days in conversation, not about wealth or war, but about the deeper truths of life. Justice, faith, the nature of power. Makeda tested him with riddles, each one a knot of words to be untangled. Solomon answered them all with ease, his replies sparking both her admiration and her reflection. The Kebra Nagast tells that when Makeda returned to her homeland, she carried with her not only gifts and treasures, but a child, Menelik, who would become the first emperor of Ethiopia's Solomonic dynasty. This lineage would last for centuries, tying Ethiopia's royal bloodline to the House of David. Today, in the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela and the ancient obelisks of Aksum, Makeda's presence still lingers. Her name is spoken in markets and sung in folk songs, her image carved into the nation's cultural memory. She is remembered not merely as a ruler of wealth, but as a seeker of wisdom, a queen who bridged worlds, whose journey linked the African highlands to the holy city. From the green hills of Sheba, our path now leads westward, to a kingdom where the waters of the Niger bend like a great serpent, and where another queen, fierce and unyielding, would rise to defend H. The sun over the Hausa plains is relentless, its heat pressing down on the earth until the air itself shimmers. Here, in the 16th century, the city-state of Zazzau, known today as Zaria in northern Nigeria, thrived as a hub of trade, its markets rich with goods from across the Sahel. But Zazzau's prosperity rested on more than commerce. It stood because it was defended by warriors who were as skilled as they were loyal, and at their head, for decades, rode Queen Amina. Amina was born into royalty, the daughter of Bakwa Turunku, the ruler who had built Zazzau into a formidable power. Yet even as a young princess, Amina preferred the clang of sword practice to the delicate rhythms of palace life. She trained alongside the men, learning not just to fight but to command, and by the time she inherited the throne, she was already a seasoned leader. Her reign was not one of quiet rule. Amina led her armies on horseback, her armor gleaming under the desert sun. Her campaigns extended Zazzau's borders far beyond their old limits, securing control over vital trade routes that carried salt, leather, cloth, and slaves between the Sahara and the savannah. Town after town fell under her authority, their rulers swearing loyalty or facing the strength of her cavalry. Legend holds that Amina introduced defensive walls to the Hausa city-states, earthen ramparts known as Ganyuar Amina. Many of these walls, or their remnants, can still be found across northern Nigeria today, silent testaments to her strategic mind. But Amina's conquests were not driven solely by ambition. By controlling the flow of goods across the region, she ensured her people's wealth and security. Zazzau became not just a military stronghold but an economic powerhouse, feared and respected across the Hausa lands. Yet her story is also one of mystery. The chronicles say little about her final years. Some claim she died in battle, others suggest she fell ill in a far-off campaign. What is certain is that her name endured, woven into the oral traditions of the Hausa, remembered as a queen who lived and died on horseback, her sword never far from her hand. Even now, centuries later, in northern Nigeria, to call someone Amina is to evoke courage, decisiveness, and strength. She stands in memory not just as a ruler, but as the embodiment of fearless leadership. From the sun-scorched plains of Zazzau, our journey now turns southward, into the lush, river-laced lands of the Congo, where another queen, one of sharp wit and unshakable will, would face the encroaching tide of European power. In the heart of Central Africa, where the Kwanza River winds through green valleys and the dense forests hum with life, lay the kingdoms of Ndongo and Matamba. The early 17th century was a time of upheaval here. The Portuguese had come, bringing not only muskets and missionaries but an unquenchable hunger for land, resources, and human lives to fuel the Atlantic slave trade. It was into this turbulent world that Nzinga band rose. From the moment she took power, she was not just a ruler, she was a strategist, a diplomat, and a survivor in a game where the stakes were nothing less than the future of her people. Her first great test came in 1622, when she traveled to the Portuguese settlement of Luanda to negotiate on behalf of her brother, the king of Ndongo. The Portuguese, accustomed to lording over African rulers, sought to humiliate her from the start. In the meeting hall, no chair was provided for her. Instead, she was expected to stand, a silent acknowledgement of subservience. Nzinga would have none of it. Without hesitation, she ordered one of her attendants to kneel so she could sit upon their back. And so, eye to eye with the Portuguese governor, she conducted the negotiations, a silent but unforgettable declaration, "I kneel to no one." Her diplomacy bought Ndongo temporary relief, but the peace was fragile. When her brother died, Nzinga claimed the throne and set about strengthening her realm. She moved her base to Matamba, forged alliances with neighboring peoples, and transformed her kingdom into a sanctuary for escaped slaves and those fleeing Portuguese oppression. This act alone made her both a savior to the oppressed and an enemy to colonial powers. For decades, Nzinga played a dangerous game, sometimes allying with the Portuguese when it suited her, sometimes waging war against them. She trained her armies in guerrilla tactics, using the forests and rivers as weapons as much as spears and muskets. In her later years, she embraced Christianity publicly, a calculated move to secure European allies, yet she remained deeply rooted in the traditions of her people. Nzinga lived into her 80s, an extraordinary feat for a leader who had spent much of her life in the heat of political and military conflict. When she died in 1663, the Portuguese might have thought her resistance ended, but her name endured, a rallying cry for those who refused to bow. Even today, in Angola, her statue stands tall in the capital of Luanda, her gaze unflinching, her legacy unbent. Nzinga's life reminds us that power can be wielded as deftly with words as with weapons, and that dignity, once claimed, can inspire centuries of defiance. From the rain-fed forests of Angola, our path now moves eastward, toward the shores of the Indian Ocean, where Swahili queens ruled bustling port cities, gateways between Africa and the wider world. The eastern shores of Africa have always been a meeting place, where the wind-borne dhows of Arabia, the great sailing ships of India, and the long canoes of the African coast converged. Here, under the steady rhythm of the Indian Ocean's tides, rose a chain of city-states, Kilwa, Mombasa, Zanzibar, Pate, and Lamu. These were places of coral stone palaces, bustling markets rich with ivory and gold, and the mingling of languages, Kiswahili carrying hints of Bantu, Arabic, Persian, and Portuguese. At the helm of these cities, often from behind the scenes yet with unmistakable influence, were queens, sultanas, and matriarchs whose decisions shaped the trade routes of the ocean. One such figure was Sultana Fatima of Pate, remembered in the oral histories of the Swahili people. In the late 17th and early 18th centuries, she ruled an island kingdom that was as much a cultural jewel as it was a trading powerhouse. Fatima understood that the sea was both a lifeline and a battlefield. To control the harbor was to control the wealth. Her court was a place where diplomacy flowed as richly as imported silks. Merchants from Gujarat presented fine cottons, sailors from Oman offered dates and frankincense, African traders brought leopard skins and gold dust from the hinterlands. But Fatima's true power lay in her ability to weave alliances. She nurtured ties with Arabian sultans, negotiated with Portuguese captains, and mediated disputes between local clans, all while ensuring her own fleet of dhows remained swift and armed. Under her reign, the arts flourished. Swahili poetry, with its delicate rhymes and metaphors drawn from the sea, found patrons in her court. Architecture blossomed in the elegant arches and carved doors of coral stone houses that still stand centuries later. Yet Fatima was not without rivals. The Portuguese sought to dominate the Indian Ocean trade, and nearby city-states competed for influence. When necessary, she turned to defense. Her navy patrolled the waters, and her alliances ensured that any hostile fleet would meet resistance from more than one shore. What set Fatima apart was her foresight. She recognized that control of the sea was never permanent. The monsoon winds shifted, empires rose and fell, but the Swahili coast endured because its rulers understood adaptation. Under her leadership, Pate remained a hub where Africa met the world, and where the Queen's hand could guide the flow of goods and ideas as surely as the tide. As the sun set over the mangrove-lined shores, and the call to prayer drifted over the harbor, the city's lamps flickered to life. In those golden-lit streets, the footsteps of merchants and travelers told a story of a queen who ruled not just with power, but with grace and balance, a ruler whose domain was as fluid and far-reaching as the ocean itself. From the salt-scented air of the Swahili coast, we now journey inland, into the mountains of Ethiopia, where queens defended not only their throne. The Ethiopian highlands are a land of ancient churches carved into stone, of peaks crowned with clouds, and valleys where the Nile's tributaries begin their long journey to the sea. For centuries, these mountains have been both shield and sanctuary, and within them rose a queen whose will was as unyielding as the granite cliffs, Empress Taitu Betul. Born in 1851 into a noble family, Taitu was known even in her youth for her sharp mind and eloquence. Her education in politics, languages, and diplomacy was unusual for women of her time, but her family understood the value of intellect in a land where alliances could determine survival. She married Emperor Menelik II, but theirs was not a union of convenience. Taitu became his most trusted advisor, strategist, and partner in governance. At a time when European powers were carving up Africa in the so-called scramble for Africa, Ethiopia stood as one of the few nations uncolonized. Italy, eager to extend its influence, sought to impose a treaty that would have made Ethiopia its protectorate. It was Taitu who spotted the deception in the treaty's Italian translation, a hidden clause that stripped Ethiopia of its sovereignty. Refusing to be deceived, she rallied the nobility, denounced the false treaty, and steeled the court for war. In 1896, when the Italian army advanced into Ethiopia, Taitu was no mere figurehead. She commanded thousands of troops, including a contingent of women warriors armed with rifles, spears, and fierce resolve. The decisive moment came at the Battle of Adwa. Amid the dust and chaos of combat, Taitu rode at the front lines, her presence a beacon to the soldiers. The Ethiopian army, fighting on home terrain and with unbreakable morale, inflicted a crushing defeat on the Italians, a victory that resounded across Africa and the world as proof that colonial expansion could be resisted. But Taitu's legacy was not solely forged in war. She founded the Ethiopian capital of Addis Ababa, envisioning it as a center of administration, culture, and trade. She encouraged the building of roads, the growth of markets, and the preservation of Ethiopia's Orthodox Christian heritage. Her influence endured even after political tides shifted against her. Though she eventually withdrew from court politics, her role in securing Ethiopia's independence remained unchallenged. Taitu Betul's reign was a testament to the power of vigilance, intellect, and courage, qualities that made her not just a queen, but the guardian of a nation's sovereignty. As the highland mists curl around the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela, the memory of Taitu rides still in the wind, the empress who would not bow, whose sharp eyes could see through the veil of diplomacy to the truth beneath. From Ethiopia's steadfast peaks, our journey now turns southward to the grasslands of southern Africa, where a young queen's courage would change the fate of her people. In the wide grasslands of southern Africa, where the horizon stretches endlessly and the wind whispers through the tall golden grass, a young woman named Nandi was destined to give rise to one of the most formidable kingdoms in African history. Born into the Langini people around the late 18th century, Nandi was known for her poise and dignity, even in youth. She belonged to a world of shifting alliances, where clans merged and divided, and cattle were both wealth and lifeblood. Nandi's path took a dramatic turn when she became the mother of Shaka, the boy who would one day forge the Zulu Empire. But before the world knew his name, there was Nandi, a woman who endured hardship, exile, and social stigma, yet refused to let her son be defined by it. In those days, being an unwed mother carried heavy shame, and Nandi faced open scorn from both her own people and her child's father's clan. Forced to leave, she wandered with her son from place to place, often surviving on the goodwill of others and the meager wealth of their cattle. But Nandi was no meek wanderer. She was fiercely protective, instilling in Shaka the pride, discipline, and resilience that would later define his leadership. She taught him that dignity was not granted by birthright, it was earned through strength and action. As Shaka grew, Nandi's influence became the foundation of his character. When he entered the service of the powerful Mthethwa chief Dingiswayo, Nandi watched from the sidelines, knowing that every lesson she had sown was taking root. When Shaka eventually rose to lead the Zulu and began transforming them into a disciplined, fearsome military power, he honored his mother above all. Nandi's role was elevated to that of Queen Mother, and her counsel was sought in matters of state. Her death in 1827 shook the Zulu kingdom to its core. Shaka ordered an unprecedented period of mourning. No crops were to be planted, no milk consumed, and great ceremonies were held to honor her. While some of his decrees were extreme, they reflected the profound respect and love he held for the woman who had given him both life and purpose. Today, Nandi is remembered not merely as the mother of Shaka, but as a leader in her own right, a woman who transformed personal adversity into a wellspring of strength for her people. Her legacy lies in the seed she planted, the fierce spirit of the Zulu nation. From the grasslands where Nandi's courage took root, we journey now westward to the coastal forests of Cameroon, where a young queen stood before colonial powers with a defiance that could not be subdued. The humid air of 17th century Ndongo and Matamba, in what is now Angola, carried the scent of earth, rain, and tension. This was a land caught between old traditions and the growing shadow of European colonial ambition. At its heart stood Queen Nzinga, a woman whose political brilliance and warrior spirit would make her one of Africa's most formidable rulers. Born in 1583, Nzinga was the daughter of the Ngola, or king, of Ndongo. She grew up in a royal court where diplomacy was as essential as warfare. By the time she was an adult, she was fluent in several languages, versed in statecraft, and skilled with both bow and spear. Her first recorded act on the political stage was legendary. Sent to negotiate with the Portuguese governor in Luanda in 1622, she entered the hall to find no seat offered for her. Without hesitation, she ordered one of her attendants to kneel so she could sit, meeting the governor's gaze as an equal. That single act declared her refusal to be diminished, a moment still retold centuries later. But Nzinga's life was not merely a matter of symbolic gestures. When her brother died, she took the throne in 1624, uniting Ndongo with the neighboring kingdom of Matamba. Facing relentless Portuguese encroachment and slave raids, she waged a decades-long resistance, blending military skill with cunning alliances. She adopted guerrilla tactics, using the dense forests as both shield and weapon. Her warriors would vanish among the trees, striking swiftly and melting back into the green shadows, a strategy that earned the region the name, the Forest of Spears. Nzinga also turned diplomacy into a weapon. She formed shifting alliances with other African kingdoms and even with the Dutch, playing European rivals against one another to protect her people. Though she briefly converted to Christianity for political leverage, she never allowed foreign faith or politics to fully bind her. Her reign lasted nearly 40 years. By the time of her death in 1663, she had secured Matamba as a powerful, independent kingdom, one that would remain a refuge for escaped slaves and resist Portuguese domination for decades to come. Queen Nzinga's legacy is carved in the memory of Angola as both a warrior and a diplomat, a leader who fought with her mind as fiercely as with her blade. Her life is a reminder that resistance can wear many faces, from the open battlefield to the quiet council chamber. From the dense forests of Angola, our story carries us to the sunlit valleys of Ethiopia, where another queen, one shrouded in both history and legend, walked the line between reality and myth. The sun blazes down on the ancient city of Meroë, its pyramids rising sharply from the golden sands, their shadows long and mysterious. Along the banks of the Nile, the kingdom of Kush flourished, a powerful civilization known for its wealth, culture, and fierce queens, the Candaces, who ruled not as consorts but as sovereign monarchs. The title, Candace, or Candake, meant Queen Mother or Queen Regnant, and these women wielded both political and military power, shaping Kushite history for centuries. Their rule challenged the patriarchal norms that dominated much of the ancient world. One of the most renowned was Queen Amanirenas, who in the 1st century BCE defied the mighty Roman Empire. When Roman forces marched southward into Nubia, aiming to expand their control beyond Egypt, Amanirenas took up arms to defend her kingdom. Mounted on horseback, she led her warriors against the legions, engaging in fierce battles that tested the might of Rome. Despite the technological superiority of the Romans, Amanirenas' strategic use of the terrain and guerrilla tactics frustrated the invaders, culminating in a negotiated peace favorable to Kush, which maintained its independence and dignity. The Candaces ruled not only with strength but with vision. They fostered art and culture, overseeing the construction of temples and pyramids that remain to this day as silent witnesses to their reign. Their legacy is etched into the Nile's history, a testament to female sovereignty in a world often dominated by men. The Candaces remind us that power and grace, intellect and might, can coexist within a single crown. As the Nile flows onward, so does our journey, from the sands of Kush to the rich delta lands of the Kingdom of Benin, where the next queen awaits her tale. In the dense, humid forests near the Niger Delta, where rivers crisscross like veins through fertile soil, thrived the Kingdom of Benin, a realm renowned for its art, trade, and complex social structures. Among its rulers, the role of the Ioba, or Queen Mother, was uniquely powerful, blending maternal influence with political authority. The most famous of these royal women was Queen Idia, mother to Oba Esegi, who ruled in the early 16th century. When Esegi ascended the throne amid internal conflicts and external threats, it was Idia who provided the counsel and spiritual support necessary to secure his reign. Idia was more than an advisor, she was a warrior and mystic. Legend tells of her involvement in secret rituals, invoking protection and strength for the king and the kingdom. She is credited with helping to repel invasions from neighboring groups and consolidating Benin's power during a critical period. Her influence extended beyond politics. Queen Idia's image was immortalized in exquisite ivory and bronze sculptures, masterpieces of Benin artistry, depicting her as a regal, serene figure adorned with coral beads and intricate hairstyles. The Queen Mothers of Benin held estates, led ceremonies, and maintained a network of women warriors and officials who helped govern the kingdom. Their presence symbolized continuity and stability, linking generations of rulers and ensuring the preservation of customs. As European traders arrived on the coast seeking palm oil, ivory, and other riches, the queens of Benin skillfully navigated these new dynamics, balancing diplomacy with defense. The kingdom's golden plaques and masks remain a testament to their sophistication and power, a cultural heritage that endures despite centuries of change and upheaval. From the riverine forests of Benin, our journey now brings us to the vast Sahel, where the empire of Mali rose under the gaze of the legendary Queen Ségolène Kéju. The sprawling savannas of West Africa stretch beneath a vast, endless sky, dotted with baobab trees and a golden haze of tall grasses. In this land rose the great Mali Empire, a beacon of wealth, culture, and power during the 13th and 14th centuries. While the empire is often remembered for the legendary Mansa Musa, its roots trace back to the strength and wisdom of a woman, Queen Ségolène Kéju, mother of Sundiata Keita, the empire's founder. Ségolène's story is one of resilience and destiny. She was born into modest beginnings but was chosen to marry the king of the Mandinka people. However, her early life was marked by hardship. She was often scorned for her physical appearance and faced jealousy from rivals within the royal court. Yet, beneath the surface, Ségolène possessed an unyielding spirit and a deep maternal love. Her son, Sundiata, was born crippled but destined for greatness. Despite challenges, Ségolène nurtured him with patience and encouragement, instilling in him the qualities of leadership, bravery, and justice. When a rival king usurped the throne, Sundiata and Ségolène were forced into exile. But the bond between mother and son remained unbroken. Ségolène's guidance and strength fueled Sundiata's return, leading to the epic Battle of Kahina, where the Mandinka people reclaimed their land and established the Mali Empire. Ségolène's legacy is woven into the fabric of Mali's history as a foundation upon which one of Africa's greatest empires was built. Her story reminds us that behind every great leader stands a figure of quiet strength, often a woman whose influence shapes history's course. As our journey through the forgotten queens of Africa comes to a close, we carry forward their stories, tales of courage, wisdom, and resilience that transcend time and inspire generations anew.